Well, hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Nonprofit Storytelling Trends You Should Know About for 2017. It is terrific to have so many of you here. I'm so grateful that you are spending the next hour or so with me. I am Vanessa Chase-Lokshin, and I'll be the host and presenter for today's webinar. And it's been great to see so many of you introducing yourselves in the chat box. If you haven't had a chance to do that yet, please feel free to. A couple of quick housekeeping things I just want to mention before we dive in here. So if you scroll all the way up to the top of the chat box, way at the top, you'll see there's a download link for the slide deck, which you can click on and you'll be able to access a PDF if that's of interest to you. We're going to go for about 60 minutes, might be a little bit shorter depending on how many questions we have. A lot of you submitted questions before the webinar, and I am going to do my best to try to get to hopefully the vast majority of them. But there were a lot, and I tried to pick the ones that were most on topic with what we're going to be talking about in the webinar, but I'll try to get to some of the others towards the end. I do also want to say that I love answering questions during the webinar as well, so feel free to send them in using the chat box anytime. If you would prefer to private message them to me, there's a little menu box down at the bottom. You can just select my name and message me directly with your question. That's no problem. So we are going to be recording this webinar, and I will send out the recording to folks tomorrow. So if you have to leave early or if you'd like to re-review the material, feel free to do that. You'll get an email with a link to watch the recording again. Let's see, what else do I want to say? Last thing, if you're having any challenges with audio or anything like that, I would suggest two things. One, generally listening in by telephone is sometimes a little bit better than listening in over your computer speakers. Sometimes that's a better connection. And I would also recommend just checking your internet connection as well. Generally using an Ethernet plug is better than using Wi-Fi. So end of my opening housekeeping items. So let's get into this. I'm really excited so many of you are here. As I said, it's great to see you all. Let's see, we have Lisa and Rebecca. We have Becky, Michelle, Linda, another Michelle, Stacy. Let's see, who else do we have here? Heidi, Kavita, Danny, Ryan. Welcome to all of you, Jamie, and so many others. We have about 300 people in today's webinar, which is terrific. And it's really great to have all of you here. So I'm excited to kind of dive into the actual topic for today. I'm talking more about some of the trends and things that are coming up this year in nonprofit storytelling. From the looks of it, a lot of you are coming to this conversation with a wide variety of different backgrounds, whether it's in communications and marketing or actually in fundraising itself, or maybe some other leadership position at your organization. So I hope that this will give you some interesting insights and some things that you can think about for your own organization. I'm going to really talk about, why I think some of these things are actually going to be important trends for the year, as well as actually giving you some useful tips and strategies for implementing them. So we can actually dive into some of the tactics. And of course, if you have questions about any of that, as I said, do let me know. I was happy to answer those for you. I do want to ask all of you a question though, before we get started. And my question for you is, what nonprofit trends are currently top of mind for you? And if you'd like, you can share your answer in the chat box. I'm sure some of you might be thinking, Vanessa, I came here today to learn about trends. I don't necessarily have any that are top of mind yet, and that's okay too, no worries. So wherever you're at is fine. I'm also always curious to see what people are kind of thinking about. So let's see, Rebecca says using video, Gail says social media. Stacy says her e-newsletter, definitely, these are all great things. Facebook Live, for sure. We're going to talk about video a lot in the first little bit. So Susan says peer-to-peer fundraising, definitely. Kathleen, short stories on social media. Yeah, so it seems like a lot of you are definitely interested in some of the digital technologies for storytelling, which we are absolutely going to talk about, and I'll share with you what we're going to cover specifically here today. So the three different areas I want to talk about are video. We're also going to talk about email, and I want to wrap up with talking about storytelling as a kind of community building tool. And this this has applications for different types of mediums and channels that you might be using, and I'll talk about that. But I actually think that this might be one of the most important things of all, because I often think that nonprofits can be such amazing facilitators of community, and storytelling can play such a big role in that. So we'll talk a little bit more about how your organization can do that. And, it might have often occur through some of these other things that you're doing already, but I think it's an important conversation to have. So as I said, we'll talk about the why and also the strategies for each of these. And I definitely want to answer your questions. So feel free to send them in, let me know what they are, and we'll answer those as we go throughout today's webinar. So I know a lot of you may know me already from other webinars, but in case this is your first time taking one with me, I thought I'd just give you a quick introduction to me. As I said, my name is Vanessa Chase Lokshin. Here's a face to put to the voice. I run a company called The Storytelling Nonprofit, and I'm also an author of a book by the same name. A lot of you may see me out speaking at conferences and at different association meetings. I'm frequently out at those places in North America, both in Canada and the US. And I've had the opportunity to work with a number of really amazing clients in the last couple of years on storytelling initiatives that have helped them raise a lot more money and also improve things like donor retention, which is equally as important. All right, so enough about me. Let's actually get into some of this material. So the first trend that I want to talk about is video, and in particular, live streaming video. I'm personally really excited about this trend because I think that it offers such a great level of connection as compared to other kinds of content that we might regularly be producing, such as text or copy for other types of things. I will say, though, that I think that this is probably the one that I find people are most tentative about because we feel like there has to be a certain level of perfection in video quality and things like that. And I'll talk about why that may not necessarily have to be the case. It can be tricky if your organization has never done video before. Getting your feet wet can feel like a really big kind of daunting task. So let me tell you a little bit about why I think this is such an important thing for you to have on your radar this year. So video is absolutely interactive and engaging. And I think when we think about the kinds of content that people are consuming more and more online, this is kind of becoming the norm. And as you're thinking about what to include in your content plan, how to really engage people, it's important to think about what they're getting used to. And frankly, people are getting used to watching more and more video online, whether it's on social media or in other places around the internet. Interestingly, video accounts for 69% of all web traffic. So it's a huge portion of people who are really focusing on watching video. And this is something that your organization can capitalize on in a lot of different ways. And I'll talk about that specifically here in a few minutes. I also think the other thing too is that video is really humanizing and authentic. As I said, text can only really convey so much when we're trying to get a message across or trying to really connect with people. But I think that when, you have audio and there's a voice coming through, or when there's even pictures and kind of the audio coming through as well as is often the case in video, I think there's just such a really interesting opportunity to really humanize your cause in a new way. And I think that with live streaming videos specifically, there's a level in which it's kind of got this authenticity to it. We know that it's not edited, there's a way in which it's all happening. And I think that can really help kind of build in a new level of trust with a lot of the audiences that you all are looking to connect with. So last thing I'll say here, social media is absolutely going the way of live video. I think we've seen this more and more in the last year or so. There's certainly platforms like Snapchat, which are really built around oftentimes live video, or videos specifically, not necessarily live video, but we have now platforms like Facebook Live, Instagram Live. There's also Instagram Stories as well. So there's lots of ways in which we're really looking in social media and combining video and text and audio and all these different things to become more proactive content producers ourselves. So why is all this important to you? What do you need to know about it? So I really thought about this and thought about how or what pieces of this might be most applicable to your organizations and how you can start to think about integrating this into the work that you're doing. So a couple of things I wanted to just kind of talk about here. Video certainly needs to be a part of your content plan. This is a big piece, right? And as you're putting together, an editorial calendar or thinking about what sort of content you're going to produce each month for your organization's various communication channels, or even for your donors, I think it's really important to think about how video can integrate into that really naturally. So you might want to pick places where in your plan where you could have a really high payoff, or where it would be easy for you to start experimenting. That's often where your audience already is. And so it's a place where you're already active and you don't necessarily have to start up and build an audience there. So that's something to think about. You can absolutely start small. And I would encourage you to think about this as in terms of kind of what I would call micro videos. So it doesn't necessarily have to be big and flashy and kind of high production value to be really effective. I think that there's a way in which you can absolutely produce smaller videos that can be as effective, if not more effective, for your social media channels and also for your website and places like that. As I said, high production value doesn't always have to be the case. And in fact, Kathleen asked me a really great question, and I'm going to answer that now. Her question was, in terms of the use of videos, how important is length and professional production? We're working on shorter videos, and we're having success with students and staff creating videos, but we wondered about maintaining consistency. So really great question. And I love the idea, Kathleen, that you're really looking at user-generated content. So actually getting people in your audiences to actively participate in creating the videos with you. Really fantastic idea. I think that you'll find that you do have to give people some direction sometimes, whether it's a prompt or a question to answer or some sort of theme that the video needs to kind of follow. But beyond that, it's really great to see creatively what people come up with. And I think that that's sometimes the magic in user-generated content, is being able to see all the different ways in which people can interpret that theme and then produce content themselves. So I wouldn't worry too much about the consistency. If you've got a few kind of guidelines in place for folks, that's often enough. But if you find that that's not enough, you might want to think about what other things you can do to really help ensure their success and make it really easy for them to participate in the project that you're working on. In terms of length, so I had a couple of interesting kind of stats that I pulled about, how long a video should be. I know a lot of you have asked me this before, and sometimes the question is more generally phrased as how long should a story be, but a video story is a little bit different. So there's a lot of things that you can think about here. So a couple of stats that I pulled for you from some different research firms in the US. So 45% of mobile videos are viewed were less than 6 minutes long. So 6 minutes might be kind of a cutoff point that you're looking at. There's also other stats that, I think on YouTube that often show that people are watching longer form videos that are often 20 or 30 minutes long, which is more of kind of a short documentary if you think about it. But, as I said, your organization might want to start small. You might want to think about doing a minute or maybe 2 minutes. If you have a lot of things to say, maybe a longer format would work really well for you. But really think through kind of what it is you're trying to communicate and what sort of form would best serve you in that case. So the last thing I want to say here on this slide is that you have so many options now for video and so many places to experiment and try this out. As I said, there's YouTube, and there's actually a way to live broadcast on YouTube using Google Hangouts if you're interested in doing that. There is Facebook Live, Snapchat, Instagram Stories, and Instagram Live. So lots of really interesting options. And I'd be curious to know, have any of you tried these? And maybe you can just let me know in the chat box. I'd be curious to know if you've tried out any of these channels, if it's something new for your organization. I personally, with the storytelling nonprofit, do a lot of YouTube videos, although I've been looking at trying to get into Facebook Live a little bit more. But I have to say I'm a little nervous about live stream video, as I'm sure some of you are as well. So Susan says YouTube and Facebook posted videos. Yeah, definitely. But not Facebook Live yet. Yeah, I think that that's kind of the next frontier for a lot of us, definitely. Yeah, so a lot of you said none yet, absolutely, which is not a problem. And I think that hopefully this will give you some more ideas. Megan said they used Facebook Live for Giving Tuesday. Wow, that's a really great idea. I love that you kind of use that as a way to integrate into the campaigns that you're doing. That's a really smart idea. Yeah, Stacey, there is an Instagram Live. It's very new. I think it's only been out for maybe like a week or two. And I've seen maybe a few people use it, but I don't think it's quite as popular as Instagram Stories is at the moment. So Kathleen, you had a follow-up question. I'm just going to answer this. So some student-created videos are not the best quality. Do other organizations decide what to save and what to post on YouTube and then add the logo and make it something more consistent? Great question. So yes, when you're doing kind of user-generated content or kind of sourcing content from different places like this, you can absolutely decide what you're going to post. You are under no obligation to share every single thing you get. So you can kind of have the final say in that, or you can also, if you get a video that you like that maybe needs a little bit of editing or you'd like someone to re-record it, you can absolutely go back to them and ask them if they'd be willing to make a few minor changes. Those are all things that I think are very reasonable to think about. And yes, yeah, when you're ready to post it, you can absolutely add some of your organizational branding. Maybe there's kind of a lower third, which is often the bar at the bottom of a video that has like a title or something like that. or your logo. Those are all good things that you can add in there for sure. Yeah, so it looks like lots of you are using Facebook Live in really creative ways, which is awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, so let's talk about some other things here. I wanted to give you some examples and talk about a couple of them just to give you some inspiration, although it looks like in the chat box there's lots of good ideas that are already being shared, which I love, so fantastic. A couple of tips for you. So first, I would really encourage you to pick a channel where your audience already hangs out. So I know some of you said that this is brand new to you and you're still trying to figure out what it is you want to try or what you may want to try. I'd really encourage you to think about, where is it that you already have an audience built up? So I know a lot of you probably have Facebook pages that, have a fairly good reach or a fairly good following. That's a great place to start, as opposed to, let's say you're not on Instagram, but you would like to start an Instagram channel. You don't necessarily have an audience built up there already. So that might take a little extra effort to get going. So as I said, think about where your audience currently is. This can be a really great starting point for you as you're looking at getting going with this. So what are some ideas in terms of the kind of content you can do for video or even live video? There are so many things. And I have to say, I'm really especially excited for this because I think there's a lot of really good applications for donor stewardship in particular. We often talk about, looking at creative ways for stewardship. This is really good. So behind the scenes, you could do expert Q&As with staff or other folks who are a part of your organization. Event coverage, I see a couple of you said that you've done that in the chat box, which is awesome. And so many other things as well. I really encourage you to think about this question. What can you offer that is different or original? Or maybe another way to think about this is, what are some areas of expertise that your organization currently has? What is some interesting information that you can offer up or things that you can share with your audience? This will often give you some really great ideas for videos that you can produce or even live stream videos that you can try out. These are all really good things. And the last thing I would say is just experiment, test, play, but most of all, have fun. I know there's often a lot of pressure to get things right. We're working on behalf of an organizational brand, and there's a certain level of, I would say, professionalism that has to come with that. But I would really encourage you to find ways to have fun with this because it should be fun and interesting, not only for your audience, but also for you as well. So test things out, don't sink a ton of time and money into this before you've really kind of figured out what it is you want to do and if it's something that you want to continue to do long term. So I see a couple of questions here. Kenita asked, how effective is Periscope? Yeah, great question. So it's certainly something that you could also use in terms of video broadcasting. I don't necessarily know if I have any data on how effective it is. I certainly know there's still people who are using it, so certainly a channel that you could try out for your organization, Kenita. A couple other questions here. I have one from Shannon who asked, what's my opinion on the use of YouTube channels for telling a story? Definitely a good option, as I said. Interesting fact, YouTube is actually the second largest search engine on the internet, only second to Google, which of course is one of the most popular search engines out there. So if you think about, what people are looking for, or if they go there to look for information or help or advice or whatever, it's a really good opportunity for your organization to be found or to find some new audience as well. Let's see, one other question I had here, which is, how effective is digital storytelling? Is it worth the money to hire someone to do it for a nonprofit? So I think this is a really great question and kind of gets to the heart of a lot of what we're talking about here is, do we actually want to invest time or money in some of these trends or emerging technologies that we're seeing? So I would say my short answer is yes. It is definitely effective in terms of, its ability to reach audiences, engage people. There's so many opportunities for digital storytelling in video and other things as well. But I would say that it's only worth hiring someone if your organization is really crystal clear on the goals and the key performance indicators for that kind of program or that kind of role specifically. And I say that because I think that sometimes organizations will often dive into a new initiative, but not really have a clear idea on how they can tell whether or not it's working, what their ultimate goal is for it. So I'd really encourage you, whether or not you plan to hire someone or whether or not you're thinking about some of these new technologies and ideas, I'd encourage you to think about, what is your goal for this? Why are you actually doing it? And what are some kind of key performance indicators that you might be able to set for yourself to be able to kind of measure the effectiveness of that. Megan asked a really great question. What are some low-cost tools that might be helpful with the quality of simple phone videos, such as tripods, etc.? Yeah, I don't necessarily know if I have a lot of specific suggestions for you. Certainly a tripod is great. A selfie stick also would work. There are a lot of things like that. I know on Amazon you can often buy like small light rings, which will improve the lighting quality in a video, some of which are less expensive than others. I would encourage you to read reviews of those on Amazon if you're interested in getting one, but those can often be really great as well. All right, so I want to give you a couple of examples before we move on to talk about the next thing. So some examples to check out of live video, but also video, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, explore.org, which does some really interesting things with live video. They actually used Facebook Live for a dive that they did off the coast of California, which was really interesting. The New York Public Library, which used a broadcast of a story time that they did outside of City Hall in order to kind of raise more awareness for their literacy programs. And the last one I'll share with you is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Their CEO actually often does questions and answers with their audience on Facebook. So this is a really great way to engage some of your staff a little bit more with donors or with people who are following you on social media, being able to answer questions about the work, about what it is you're up to, all great things that you can think about doing. I'll give you a more specific example of one of these. So, and I'm sorry if this image isn't great on this slide, but this is an example from the Met, as you can see. So this is one of their Facebook Live events. And this was actually kind of a behind the scenes tour that one of their researchers and curators did, where they walk viewers through an exhibit that they had, and they talked a little bit about it. So again, a really great way to kind of give people some more insight into what your organization is up to and as a way to engage them. So I see lots of great questions coming in. So I'm going to answer a couple of them before we go on. Let's see. So Mila asked, what are my measurements for the success of storytelling? So I don't know if I necessarily have ones that I always use. What I will say is that storytelling is a tool that will often help you do other things better. So it really depends on what application you're using storytelling for. So for instance, if you were going to use it in, let's say, a fundraising appeal, one of my key performance indicators for that would be looking at the response rate, or looking at what kind of call to action people responded to, or ultimately how much money was really raised from that appeal. In social media, it could be things like reach. It could certainly be things like shares, click-throughs. Those are all useful measurements for you. I would really encourage you to think about what is the bottom line, though. What is most important for your organization, and how can you, really develop some metrics or indicators around whether or not you can identify the success of that project. There's so many ways to do this. And I know that this is kind of an elusive thing for a lot of folks looking at, how do we actually measure whether or not storytelling was effective for us? So as I said, would really encourage you to think about, how are you using storytelling, and what are some of the goals that are part of that project? And that will often give you some good indications as to some measurements that you can use. Okay, so question for you. I always like to encourage you to think about some reflection questions as we go through webinars. What could a subject of your next video be? And I would encourage you to just think creatively, what sort of things could you broadcast? What kind of content could you create? Lots of ideas. I know many of you have shared some great things in the chat box, so I encourage you, if you're listening in, to also scroll back up and take a look at some of the ideas folks have shared. All right, so I want to move us on because I do want to get to everything, and I know there's been so many questions, and I will get to some of these at the end as well. So I want to talk about storytelling in email. I think that this is a really interesting topic, and some of you might be surprised to see this here, or maybe not, depending on what your organization is up to. Email for sure is one of my favorite fundraising channels. I would also say for communication as well. It's a really effective communication tool for organizations still, even though there is, data pointing to response rates dropping, but there are ways to mitigate that. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And I think we're going to see this as more of a trend in 2017. And I want to tell you a little bit about why specifically. So I will maintain that I think that email is still by far the best direct response channel on the internet for nonprofit organizations. And I say direct response because it's really related to our fundraising uses for emails. So by that, I mean, we have to be able to get people to respond quickly, rapidly. Sometimes email is by far the best way to still do this. And I say that because one of the things that we've consistently seen in the last couple of years is social media reach on the decline. Now, you might find it odd that I say this, given that we just talked a lot about video and applications for video on social media. But social media is still a great way to engage people, to cultivate donors, to steward them, to reach new audiences. Those are all very useful applications of social media. What social media is still not great for is being able to directly result in gifts coming in for your organization. On the other hand, email is resulting in more gifts than ever before in online channels. So this is why I still think that it is a very good idea for organizations to be focusing a lot of time on email and thinking about, writing high quality emails, growing your list, being able to really cultivate a solid digital program. I think really email will ultimately be at the heart of that. The number one activity on smartphones is in fact reading emails. So, people often talk about the rise of mobile, how important that is, that organizations are kind of accounting for that. Well, one of the things that people are still doing a lot of there is reading their email. So it's a great opportunity for you to connect with them and for them to be able to see that information. Last thing I'll share with you here, emails with a narrative outperform emails that do not have a narrative. And this comes out of some research that M&R did in a report that I think they published a couple of years ago. So and the report was called Storytelling and the Art of Email Writing, in case any of you are interested in looking that up. They looked at two different types of narrative in email. They looked at kind of a general narrative about the organization and also a personal narrative, so a narrative about a specific person. And what they actually found was that the general narrative outperformed the personal narrative, interestingly. And I'll tell you a little bit about why I think that that's actually the case here in a couple of slides. But the thing that I want to underscore is that you have to have some kind of narrative in that email, whether it's about a specific person, about a project, about your organization. There has to be a story, and it doesn't always have to be a story about a specific person, but there does need to be some kind of narrative structure in place that people can connect with, they can follow, that inspires them. All of those really important things that we see in storytelling and in fundraising. So what do you need to know? A couple of things here. So I think there's kind of two ways to think about this for your organization. So you can think about narrative in one specific email, of course. So if you're writing an email to your list, maybe in the next couple of weeks, and it's a fundraising email, maybe you'll think about what kind of narrative you're going to tell in that one specific email. The other way to think about it is as the narrative over time. So you're going to be communicating with people, several times a month, maybe, ideally. And, over time, you're creating a narrative in the kind of communication that you're sending to them. So you can also think about what is the story that you're going to tell this year, or what is the story you want to tell about a project, or maybe a service that your organization provides. What is the kind of narrative that you'll tell over a series of emails, or kind of construct over a series of emails? These are both really interesting ways to think about this, and I would encourage you to do so because the more, I think, strategic thought organizations put into that narrative over time, I often think that they're much more successful because they've really got a strong grasp on what it is they're trying to communicate and how they can really be effective with that over a period of time. You can absolutely use photos and videos in an email, but I would encourage you not to solely rely on them. And I say that because not everyone is able to download videos or images in an email. So having some text to complement it or to still communicate that message is really, really important. We saw this with one of our clients in December on a landing page. In fact, their landing page for fundraising was just an image that had some text on it. And the question that came up for us was, well, what if people can't see that image? How are they going to know what's happening on this landing page? All there was a donate button. So those are some things, smaller things to think about anyways, as you're kind of considering, how to integrate some of these more interactive pieces into an email and into your digital fundraising program. The last thing I'll say is focus on list engagement. And this is kind of a sidebar to the narrative and the storytelling pieces that we're going to talk a little bit more about. But I want to say that engagement levels is one of the best indicators as to what kind of response rates you're going to see in email. What do I mean by engagement? So that basically means the kind of actions that people have taken recently. So that might be signing a petition. It might be sharing something on social media. It might be donating. It might even be clicking through to read an article or read something else. But looking at that level of engagement where people have actually actively done something within the email that you sent them is often the best indicator that they're going to take action again. And the thing that I would really look at is recency. So people who have taken an action between 0 and 90 days are often the best segment on an email list. So these are all things to think about, especially if digital fundraising is a focus for your organization, as I think it increasingly is for a lot of nonprofits. And you're really trying to maximize email fundraising. List engagement would be top of mind for me. All right. So a couple of questions I want to just pause here and answer because I did get a couple in. So going back to this concept of narrative over time, I got a really great question from Stacy. And Stacy's question was, if you share a story during the year, can you use the same story in a year-end review? Would you copy it exactly or change the language a bit to freshen it up? So yes, you can absolutely reshare stories and kind of regurgitate things that you've said before. I say that because not everyone is going to have seen things that you sent in the past. So for a good portion of your audience, that might be brand new information for them, which is great. It's always good to try to find ways of exposing more people to that information. You can absolutely change up some of the text if you wanted to, but if it worked really well and you had a good response rate to it or people really liked it, you may just want to leave it as the same thing. Or as the kind of same format or same text that you used before. I'll give you an example of this here in a couple of slides. Let's see, we've got a couple of other questions here. So Danny wants to know, how often should we be sending emails? Yeah, so frequency of emails is definitely something to be thinking about. You want to be able to kind of find the sweet spot between being able to send a decent amount of emails to engage people often, but you want to make sure that you're not getting huge unsubscribe rates, right? And I think that this is different for every organization. If your nonprofit historically has not been sending a lot of emails, you might find that you get high unsubscribe rates at first because people are not used to hearing from you. They probably forgot that they subscribed and then they're like, well, I should just unsubscribe from this, which is not what we want. So getting people in the habit of getting used to receiving emails from our organization is definitely important. So something to for sure think about there. I don't necessarily know if I have a magic number for you. I would say at minimum, I would be looking at sending 2 emails a month. And it depends on the size of your list. And as I said, unsubscribe rates, those are things that you would want to consider. It's very possible that M&R has some information about email frequency in their benchmark study. So you can definitely take a look at that for sure. And Kathleen, it seems like you answered Michelle's question the same way I would have. So yes, definitely a single issue email is the best for that. Yeah. All right, so one more question I'll quickly answer. So someone asked if I could just define list engagement. So basically that means people who have actively done something on your list. So they have donated, they have signed a petition, they have shared something on social media, they have clicked through to read an article. Those are all types of engagement. And depending on what it is your organization does specifically, you might want to take a look at how you define that kind of engagement, or think about other ways that you can engage your audience and kind of you get them to take action more regularly. All right, so a couple of tips for you. Email your list regularly. I just talked a little bit about frequency, so I won't go into that too much. Which is definitely something that you might want to think about doing more of. I would encourage you to map out your messages and stories over time. And I want to say in email, I think one of the most important things you can do is think about your story as your actual theory of change. And theory of change is really a story about why your solution is the best to solve the problem that you are presenting to your audience in the fundraising email. And if you don't have a strong theory of change, I think that your argument often comes across as very weak as to why someone should respond. And I'll give you an example of that here in a couple of slides. But the theory of change, I think, is really the basis of a strong email story, especially when we're telling a more general story to our audience. So I see a couple of you asked about M&R. Yes, thank you, Danielle, for sharing that in the chat box. So there is now a link to M&R. They are a fantastic agency that does a lot of digital fundraising work. And they produce a couple of really great reports every year that do some benchmarking for the nonprofit sector. So I highly recommend looking at those if you're doing a lot of digital reporting or digital fundraising. Yeah, and they're definitely fun reports. They often do some really fun infographics and things like that. All right, so email examples to check out in case you're thinking about types of emails that you could be sending or creative things you could do. Here's a couple that I like to follow, ones that I would recommend looking at for some inspiration. Invisible Children, they often send out really great emails. Best Friends Animal Society, UNICEF USA Fund, Beagle Freedom Project is another one I often enjoy reading. There are so many others, and I would love to know what ones you all enjoy reading. I know many of you are on email lists for nonprofits, so feel free to share those in the chat box if you feel like you've seen nonprofits that send out fantastic emails. It's always great to see some of those. So here's an example from one. This isn't from Invisible Children, and my apologies if the text is really small in this. If you download the slides, you should be able to see it a little bit better. This was a stewardship email they sent I think pretty recently, maybe in the last week or two. And similarly to kind of the question that Stacy was asking about repeating stories, this email actually went through and gave kind of small vignettes or small stories about things that they did last year, all of which were things that they talked about in other emails in 2016. But I have to say, it's been, I get so many emails, I would never remember a lot of these things specifically. So they gave a little short paragraph, a picture that related to the project and the work. Really great idea for stewardship if that's something your organization is thinking about. All right, another one, and the text is a little fuzzy on this. So this is from the UNICEF USA Fund, which does international development work. And this is, again, an example of a single narrative, and it's about a specific person who is a child soldier at one point in his life, and he talks about the impact of that and the work that UNICEF USA is doing specifically to help child soldiers and their families in countries in Africa. So another example of how they kind of use single narrative, you can also see there's a really great image and a pull quote that kind of engages people, but that image is not kind of the linchpin of this email. If you couldn't see the image, you would still be able to get the gist of it from reading everything else that's there. Yes, Jolene, I love Beagle Freedom Project as well. They do have really great communications, definitely. All right, so I'd encourage you to think about, what is one thing you could do to improve your organization's emails? We've talked about a lot of different things. I know many of you are at different places in terms of where you're at with email and digital fundraising. I'd encourage you to think about, what is one thing you could do differently this year in terms of incorporating storytelling and really being able to make some improvements this year and really kind of up the ante, so to speak. All right, so last thing here. Yeah, I see some of you said some things already. Emailing consistently, absolutely. That's a big one. So last thing I want to talk about is storytelling as a community building tool. So I'm really excited to talk about this one because I think that nonprofits, as I said earlier, have such an important opportunity to be community facilitators and community builders. And I think, especially in kind of the political climate that we're in these days in the US and in other countries as well, I think it's more important now than ever for nonprofits to be a voice for values for groups of people and to be able to communicate those values through stories and to be able to bring people together. I want to talk about that a little bit more and also just how you can do this as organizations. So one of the things I think is so important about community building through storytelling is that it really establishes audience inclusion. It allows the audience to be a part of what's happening, to feel like they are part of a community that might share values, principles, beliefs, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. It just feels like there's a sense of inclusion and community, which is often really important. I think values-based work is going to be increasingly important this year. And I had a couple of really great questions from both Angela and Kathy who asked me, how's storytelling going to change in the current, social and political climate in the US specifically, which is really great. And I have to say, I have thought about this some, but I think I want to give you all a much more thoughtful answer, maybe in a blog post next week. But my two kind of high-level points of thinking about this is that one, stories communicate values. And so I think it's more important now than ever for us to be telling stories that articulate values that both you and your audience share, whatever those are. The second thing I want to say about this is that stories have the ability to cultivate empathy, which is the opposite of judgment. And I think in this increasingly divided time in the US, it's really important for us to be thinking about how we can cultivate empathy and kind of bridge the divide, so to speak, or even cultivate empathy more within our own communities. I think it allows people to kind of let go of some judgments and to be able to focus on what they do have in common with other people. And that can be an important role that nonprofits can take on. So those are my kind of high-level thoughts about, fundraising and storytelling in this political climate. As I said, I do want to give you all a much more lengthy answer to that. So stay tuned for something maybe next week on the blog. I have a lot more thoughts on that, and I would love to get those out to all of you. I'll say the other thing that I think is really important about storytelling as a community tool is that it's another way to relationship build with folks. We're constantly thinking in fundraising anyways about how we can move people through, cycles, the different relationship building phases, right? Cultivating them, stewarding them, soliciting them. I think that community building is one of those ways in which we can relationship build long-term with people, where we're really cultivating a much deeper, meaningful connection with our audiences. So what are some things you can think about in all of this? User-generated content can be one absolutely great way that you can community build. And I say that because it invites people to participate, to be a part of what your organization is doing, and to feel like they can really, contribute something and be a part of the excitement or whatever it is you're working on. I'll say that the kind of nerve-wracking thing about user-generated content for probably a lot of you, or if you've never thought about it before, is that, you think about, well, what could possibly go wrong with this? It's probably a long list of things that could. I want to say, though, that I think it's okay to kind of loosen your grip and to allow things to be a little imperfect and to allow for kind of the authenticity that comes up in community when people are contributing. I think that's really important and something to kind of consider. Another thing you can also think about is kind of treating it like a kind of campaign. So you could have certain prompts or ideas or calls to action that you have as you're trying to use storytelling to community build with people. And, you might want to change it up every month or every quarter, or kind of use something maybe long-term. And that could be a really great way to kind of facilitate that ongoing connection and ongoing engagement with your organization. So a few other tips for you. I'd encourage you to pick a topic that your audience will be interested in. So something that they feel like they have something to say, like a topic that they have something to say about, or can easily produce photos or videos for you. Sometimes it's helpful to get key people to agree to participate ahead of time, to join the discussion, or to kind of be the first to go, so to speak. So you can think about, staff or volunteers who might be able to help you in this department. That can really help facilitate, I think, much more engaging community building if you have some of those people who are already, will respond. The last thing I'll say is that you want to make it easy for people to participate. So don't make it hard for people to participate in your community, whether it's, having conversations on Facebook with you, or, sharing an image online that's a part of a hashtag campaign that you're running. Make it really easy for them to participate and feel like they can be a part of all the excitement that's happening at your organization. So I don't necessarily have any really great examples for you, but I did have a few ideas that I'll share with you on this. So, you can invite people to share pictures on a hashtag. This is a really great thing that you can do if you have an event, or you want people to, be sharing photos or content of some topic that your organization is working on. This can be really great. One thought I had on this is, coming up in a month or two is International Women's Day. So if your organization does work around International Women's Day, maybe you want to have people share content related to that and do kind of a community building exercise around that. You can also invite people to share stories. You could use a form on your website. You could just invite them to share it in a comment thread on Facebook. All of those things are great places. You can just kind of have it organically happen, in comment threads or discussion threads, things like that. If you want to facilitate this as a bigger project, maybe you have people submit it on a form, and then maybe that goes to, a gallery or website page where you have all the stories. Those are all really interesting things that you could think about. What I'd encourage you to think about here is to creatively curate this content. There's so many ways to do it. There's so many ways to community build, to encourage people's participation, to amplify the voices of the people who are involved with your cause. And so, think about all those different tools that you can use. I enjoy using Storify sometimes, which is a really great tool to pull together social media posts from lots of different places, especially if you had a hashtag or something like that happening for an event or, a specific campaign. That can be a great way to pull all those things together. As I also said, starting a gallery wall on your website, those can all be really useful too. All right, so what else do I want to say about this? I think that's it. I do want to answer a couple of questions though. I see a lot that have come up in the chat box as well. So we have a few questions that came up related to this. So Elizabeth asked, did I have any storytelling strategies for teams that are far away from services such as international development work? So there's lots of different things that you can do to do this. As I said, potentially just using a hashtag or something like that could be really useful on social media for people to quickly share stuff that you can then pull from. Having team meetings where you ask people to share stories can also be useful. Having a forum on your website, also a great idea. Lots of little things like this can really help facilitate that much faster. All right, so let me scroll back up here and look at some of the questions we have in the chat box. Yeah, so great questions. Yeah, and I appreciate, Angela, you sharing your story form. There are lots of really great ones online that you can look up. I feel like I Googled something like this the other day. I was able to find some. But I'm sure if you Googled something like share your story forms, I suspect you'd probably get some good results from that, because I think that's what a lot of people will call them. But yeah, I'm glad you shared that with folks. It's a really great tool and a great thing to use as a part of kind of the community building that your organization is doing. All right, so I just want to talk quickly about implementing change before we wrap up, and we can go to some more questions before we end. So I want to encourage you to pick one, maybe two ideas to try. I know we talked about a lot of different things. Don't feel like you have to do everything. Pick something that works for you, that feels easiest to implement and lightweight, that you can kind of get going very quickly. I'd encourage you to experiment. Testing is the root of, I think, all great innovation and progress in fundraising and storytelling. So track your progress, find some metrics that you can look at, experiment, be okay making mistakes and maybe not having things work out perfectly. The last thing I'll say is really focus on using channels that your audience is already on. I know I've said this a couple of times today, but I think it's such an important factor in our success. And I really encourage you to think about that as you are kind of putting together your plans for this year. All right. Last question for you before we go to questions. I'd encourage you to think about, what is one small step you can take this week? Maybe it's brainstorming some video content. Maybe it's thinking about ways that you can facilitate community building. Write it down on your piece of paper, maybe file it away, and just think about how you might be able to implement some of what it is you've learned here today. All right, and with that, I would like to go to questions. So we have some time to answer some questions for folks. I am just going to scroll up through the chat box because I know that we had a lot of really great questions come in earlier. And if you have questions that I have not answered, feel free to send them in, and I'd be happy to answer those for you. So let's see. Great questions. All right, so Kathleen asked, looking at a click-through rate in an email is easy, but are there other tools for looking at list engagement? Yeah, so typically in a email service provider, you can absolutely pull data and information on your list. So I would look at things like, if you're using MailChimp, for instance, they have a member rating. So members are kind of automatically rated 1-star through 5-star. 5-star being like the most engaged, people who've opened every email you've sent and clicked on things. You can look at that as a type of list engagement. You can also generally, or you should be able to anyways, pull reports on, who's responded to emails that you've sent, things like that. Those are also kind of good metrics that you can look at. Definitely. Yeah, Rebecca asked, what email platforms do I like best? Good question. I don't know if I necessarily love any ones in particular. For the storytelling nonprofit, I personally use MailChimp, which has worked out pretty well for me the last 4 or 5 years now. Sometimes I do think about migrating, but I'm sure as many of you can probably relate, data migration is not high on your list of things to do or things that sound really fun. Danielle says Luminate, which is the Blackbaud all-in-one online fundraising platform, certainly something else you can use. I know a lot of other organizations use things like Constant Contact. If your organization is really serious about digital fundraising and you're looking at things like how to automate emails or create kind of funnels for people based on engagement or things that they've clicked on. You might even want to look at something that's a little bit more traditionally more business focused, like Entreport, which is definitely more expensive, but it has a lot of capacity and capabilities as an email tool for sure. Danny asked, what about text size and fonts? What are my recommendations? Oh, for sure. Easy to read, definitely. So it's got to be at least like size 12 or 14. I typically opt for at least 14. People have got to be able to read it. Especially if you think about on a mobile phone, which has such tiny screens, you've got to have people be able to, be able to actually see what it is you're writing. You don't want them to be straining or be like, I can't read this, and then just archive it or delete it. Definitely not. Becky, yes, you can definitely use the examples. Feel free to do that. And if you have any questions, you can just reach out to me about that. All right. So Teresa asked, our emails are both announcements to buy tickets to our show as well as fundraising. Do I have a recommendation about how to do those effectively? Yes, I always encourage people to send emails that only have one ask. So that means you got to pick one. You'll have a much better response rate and people will not be as confused or opt not to do anything because there's too many options. So if you're going to ask them for a donation, ask them for a donation. If you're going to ask them to buy tickets, ask them to buy tickets. This is, I think, probably my biggest pet peeve in emails is when I see people send out something that has like 5 or 6 calls to action, which is ultimately really ineffective in terms of how you're going to be able to get a response rate and get people engaged with that email. So I'd really encourage you to think about just doing one ask per email. And that might mean a shorter email, and that's totally okay. Let's see, other questions. So I think, Stacy, your question about having an interpreter voice on the video is answered, which is great. I'm glad someone else is able to answer that for you. Karina, what are the best ways to capture content from clients other than a survey? Yeah, so you could interview people face-to-face for sure. You could, other than a survey, so interviewing people, sometimes depending on what your program is, you might have kind of like an end of program wrap up where you can collect some of that information from them. I would say probably just following up with people, an email or a phone call that's really personal is probably the best way to be able to capture some of that from them. But if you're looking for more of like mass content capture, probably having a hashtag that's really easy for you to find online is going to be something that'll be ultimately useful. Let's see, Ryan wants to know what my opinion of Thunderclap for community involvement is. I don't know if I have an opinion on that. I've seen it used a lot. In fact, my alma mater, the University of British Columbia, has used it several times for different alumni initiatives and fundraising work. I don't necessarily know if I see the full point in it. I know it's exciting. Like, I know the point is to get people to like simultaneously tweet about it, but I don't know if that's necessarily as effective as just like emailing people and asking them to social share right away. So I don't know if I have a good opinion on that. It's something you might want to test out if it's something you're looking at. All right. Let's see other questions. Yeah, so Joanne wants to know best lesser known metrics. Oh, good question. So Joanne, maybe you can tell me lesser known metrics for what? Is there a specific channel you're looking at or something you have in mind to measure? If you could let me know, that would be super helpful. And I can give you some ideas. All right, Kavita, I once tried to get volunteer stories captured, but the only energy efficient way was a survey. This was really insufficient for us. What are other quick ways to get content from people who have been engaged in an event / activity or organization? Yeah, definitely. I think if it's an event, finding ways for them to share content while they're at the event is probably your best bet, because once they leave, they're probably not going to think about it. So that might be having a hashtag and really actively telling people to use it. It might be at the end of the event, making an ask for people to share something, write something down and submit it before they go. Those are all things you can do. Yeah, I mean, I have to say it is definitely always energy intensive to get content from folks. If you have volunteers who you feel like you can trust and equip to kind of run that process for you, that might also be something to kind of help you out and to kind of alleviate some of that from your from your plate and to be able to have other people who are kind of out there making those asks for you. Yeah. Let's see other questions here. So Kathleen, how you balance how many calls to action versus annoying people and increased unsubscribe rate? I try to combine a single topic in emails and e-newsletters. Other thoughts? Yeah, definitely. So I have to say, folks, unsubscribes are inevitable. People will always unsubscribe from your emails. And frankly, I don't think that's such a bad thing because those people were probably never going to donate to you anyways. The thing that you really want to look for is abnormally high unsubscribe rates in an email. So, you might want to historically look at what have your unsubscribe rates been so that you can kind of internally benchmark it for yourself, which is absolutely a good thing to do. If you're worried about, annoying people or emailing folks too many times, I'd encourage you to segment and think about following up with people who really like your content or your emails. So folks who've maybe opened up every email or who have donated recently, who opened the last email that you sent. That can often be a good way to target and get low on subscribes. But the problem with that is the less that you email those other people, the more likely they are to lapse as kind of engaged subscribers on your email list. So I would say don't neglect them for too long. Find ways to kind of reconcile both of those things. But yeah, like I said, unsubscribe's definitely inevitable. So it's just a matter of kind of like finding ways to mitigate that. Segmentation is often very useful, and I would encourage you to think about that for sure. Let's see, did I miss your answer to this? I'm interested in Ryan's question. What would you recommend in terms of video storytelling to an organization that has to maintain anonymity of its clients? I did not answer that question, and I'm glad you kicked it back to me. So a couple of things I would recommend in terms of anonymity if you're doing video storytelling. You can certainly have staff or volunteers tell stories from their perspectives, which will often protect client identity, and that's, of course, very important. If you want, you could have other people read a client's story so that it's a different voice and that it won't be identifiable as the original person's story. That's certainly something you can think about. Animation can also be really useful. So you can think about other types of video. It might just not be a person in the video. You could think about animation or things like that, which might mean that you do not have to have people actually in the video, but you can still tell some of those stories. Definitely. Yeah, so I'd encourage all of those things. Yeah, oh yeah, Kathleen, no, I hear you on that. So you're a school and unsubscribes you is contact with alumni. Yeah, absolutely. I hear you on that, how challenging that is. Yeah, and I think, like I said, it is inevitable that unsubscribes will happen. But, if you do have other ways of contacting alumni, through mail or by phone, that's still useful and can still certainly be something that can help you long term. All right. So we are coming to the end of our webinar. I do just want to say a couple of quick things before we wrap up. I'm so glad so many of you here stuck it out to the end. Thanks so much for being here. I do want to let you know if you're interested in learning more about storytelling in the next month or two, I am going to be teaching a class starting in March. We're opening up registration very soon. It's called the Storytelling Nonprofit Masterclass. It's a 6-week class that's kind of an immersive online experience in storytelling. So if this is something that's a priority for your organization, I encourage you to check it out. You can find out more about it at thestorytellingnonprofit.com/master.class. Lots of great content that's going to be covered in there. We've had over 120 organizations go through it, and I'm really excited to meet our next cohort of students coming up. All right, so with that, if you do have questions lingering after today's webinar or resources you need me to point you in the direction of, feel free to reach out to me. This is my email address here on the slide, Vanessa@thestorytellingnonprofit.com. I always love receiving emails from folks, so feel free to email me anytime and I can definitely help you out. Thanks again so much to all of you for being here. Really glad you could join me, and I'm so appreciative of your time. I hope you all have a great rest of the day and all the best with your storytelling endeavors this year.